wondering, right, because with the concept of investigative journalism, at that time you were saying nobody else was doing it. How it came about? What are the challenges? Was it because you guys are so young, so you see that as a very interesting thing to explore? So youth has this energy, right? What is the worst that can happen? We fail and we learn something.
Yeah.
It seems like in doing investigative journalism is so much more difficult.
Yeah.
That's why nobody else is doing it, maybe.
I think luck definitely played a part in that. Like, we were very fortunate to have done that pivot at like the right time, where young people were becoming more and more empowered through technology. And I do think so. Like, I generally believe young people are always probably the most idealistic and passionate age group, that the people that you should look to drive change. But in Malaysia, youth were always not very empowered to do that, right? Through whether it's because of legislation, whether it's because of cultural, norms. But, at Rage, the great thing was that we had a few years of, with the editors that I mentioned, Ivy and Nikki, pushing us to, believe in young people. We represent their voices. That is our job as a youth paper. So let's do that. Let's do justice to them. Let's do right by them. So I think we got lucky that this generational shift, in a way, like this cultural shift that happened right at that right time, and we were starting to notice that as well. And we felt the best way for us to pivot to cater to that was through investigative documentaries. Some of it was also very practical considerations, because we were also starting to do investigative, like I said, more amateurish type investigations, where we used a lot of digital tools like online sleuthing on social media to do a couple of stories. And at the time, there were a lot of what we call these news aggregator sites that were popping up. So basically, they would aggregate stories, quote unquote, aggregate stories from other platforms. So they don't hire actual journalists. They don't do first-hand reporting. They copy and paste, essentially. So they were copying and pasting quite a few of our stories. And so what the kind of I feel like the business model for these types of platforms is they spend more money on marketing, on repurposing content, than having to fund actual journalists on the ground, right? So when they copy and pasted some of these early investigative work that we did, they got a lot more traction. They got a lot more traffic. They got much higher viewership and engagement, and it was just really bad for us. It was very bleak, looking at, is this the future? That we're just going to keep losing out. We're going to spend months on an investigation, and it's just going to get copied by somebody else. So from a very practical perspective, doing documentaries, doing video in particular, makes it much harder for them to copy our stories and copy our videos. And even if they did try to copy our videos, at least our watermark is there, our logo is there, so there's still some residual benefit for us. So that's kind of why we did it, and why I think we were lucky to have done it at the right time, and also to have good people at the Star who backed us at the time, when a lot of people wondering, how did that happen? Like, how did the Star, which is this legacy media company, quite traditional, quite conservative in many ways in the way it operates, and in terms of the content it puts out as well sometimes, how did we create an investigative, very progressive platform within that system? And it's because there were people there that really, really believed in it and really, really backed us. Yeah.
I do wonder about some of the challenges that you face going into investigative journalism, because some of the issues that you took up, it's not just controversial, but it's very sensitive issue. Sensitive in terms of it sometimes tips the balance of power, right? With very, very either powerful or dodgy parties who might make things very difficult, if not dangerous, for the team doing the investigation. Yeah. How do you think about investigative journalism work? In this sense, in Malaysia itself, what's the culture like, and how difficult or dangerous it is to do this kind of work? Is that the reason why there's so few journalists or so few teams doing it?
Yeah, I definitely think that's true. I think there's a culture here of, in a similar way, in terms of how youth, maybe a decade ago, were kind of disempowered. I don't know if that's even a word, but kind of systematically lulled into thinking that their voice doesn't matter, or it's maybe just cultural norms. So I think the same thing has happened to a lot of media organizations in Malaysia, which is why I tend to not be very harsh on traditional media companies and media organizations. When I know you see social media comments and they tend to be very violently angry at media sometimes, and I'm like, it's tough for them too. It's tough for these. So I think media organizations don't do investigative journalism because of that, because there's this culture of thinking no point lah, if I do it, what's is it going to make a difference? Will it get published? And another thing is very practical as well. Not everybody has the resources to do it. It is very expensive to run an investigation of any kind. It takes a lot of time, a lot of resources that newsrooms really can't afford. In Dala, Malaysian media companies don't get a lot of financial support from things like subscriptions, so like the traditional advertising model to fund newspapers, news organizations is being a bit broken by the likes of Google and Facebook. So all the more reason media companies have to scale back on this type of work. But again, we were very, very lucky at the time. There were people there that took a gamble on us and backed us.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Giving Hub.